The conference room on the 52nd floor of the Meridian Tower felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. I sat at the head of the granite table, watching the blizzard assault the windows while my hands remained perfectly still on the portfolio documents in front of me. The door burst open. My father walked in first, brushing snow off his $1,000 coat like he owned the building. My mother followed, her heels clicking against the marble with that familiar rhythm of entitlement. Then came my brother Marcus, scrolling through his phone, not even bothering to look up. They hadn't seen me in 17 years, not since the night they decided I was worth less than their reputation. My mother's eyes swept past me twice before she finally spoke, and when she did, the words that came out of her mouth made my blood run cold for an entirely different reason than the storm outside. "Excuse me, could you grab us some coffee?" she said, waving her hand dismissively in my direction. "We're here for the reading of Richard Mercer's will. Family only." She thought I was the assistant. Victoria Chen, the estate attorney, didn't even blink. She just adjusted her glasses and said 7 words that changed everything. "Mrs. Mercer, that's your son." "Liam, before I tell you what happened when my mother realized she'd just asked the new CEO of a $300 million empire to fetch her coffee, let me take you back to where this really started, because you need to understand that the cruelest thing a family can do to you isn't abandonment. It's making you believe you deserved it." I was 14 years old when my parents sat me down at the kitchen table and explained, very calmly, very rationally, why I needed to disappear. The family business was struggling. My father's consulting firm was hemorrhaging clients. My mother's boutique PR agency had lost its 3 biggest accounts in 6 months. They were drowning in a sea of their own poor decisions, hidden behind the facade of a perfect upper-middle-class life in Connecticut. Country club memberships they couldn't afford. Private school tuition for Marcus that was bleeding them dry. A house with a mortgage so underwater it might as well have been the Titanic. They needed someone to blame. They needed a story that would explain why they were about to lose everything without admitting they were failures. So they created one, and I was the main character. It happened on a Wednesday in October. I came home from school to find my father standing in my room, holding my laptop. His face wasn't angry. That's what I remember most clearly. He looked relieved, almost grateful. "We found the evidence, Liam," he said, turning the screen toward me. "The gambling websites, the credit card fraud, the identity theft." I stared at the screen, at accounts I'd never created, at transactions I'd never made, at a digital trail that led directly back to me, constructed with such meticulous care that even I almost believed it for a second. "I didn't do this," I said. My voice sounded small, weak, like it was coming from someone else's body. My mother appeared in the doorway. She was holding papers, legal documents. "We know you did it to help us," she said, and her voice had this terrible gentleness to it, like she was comforting a dying animal. "We know you thought you were being helpful, stealing from our clients to pay our bills. But Liam, this is fraud. This is federal. If we don't report you, we become accomplices." The trap was perfect, psychologically devastating, legally airtight. If I denied it, I was a liar and a thief. If I admitted it, I was a criminal. Either way, I became the reason for their failure, the problem that needed to be removed. They gave me 2 choices. Option 1, they call the police. I get arrested for financial crimes I didn't commit, crimes they had actually fabricated using my identity while I was at school. I go to juvenile detention, maybe adult prison depending on how hard they pushed it. My life ends at 14. Option 2, I sign a confession admitting to everything. I agree to be sent away to a rehabilitation program for troubled youth. They tell everyone in our social circle that I had a mental breakdown, that I was struggling with impulse control, that they're heartbroken but doing what's best for me. I disappear quietly. They save face. Their friends feel sorry for them instead of judging them. Their financial collapse becomes a tragic circumstance instead of incompetence. Because after all, they had to deal with the troubled child on top of everything else. I was a terrified, confused 14-year-old kid who still believed his parents loved him on some level. I signed the paper, but they didn't send me to a rehabilitation program. There was no program. That was another lie. They drove me 6 hours north to Portland, Maine, to an industrial neighborhood that smelled like fish and diesel fuel, and they dropped me off at a warehouse, address they'd scribbled on a piece of paper. "Richard will take you," my father said. He didn't turn around, didn't look at me. "Your uncle. He knows what you did. He's agreed to keep an eye on you. I didn't even know. I had an uncle named Richard. They'd never mentioned him. Not once in 14 years. My mother finally turned around as I stood there on the curb with a duffel bag containing everything I was allowed to keep. Don't contact Marcus, she said. Don't contact anyone from home. You're a liability now, Liam. If you care about this family at all, you'll stay gone until you've fixed yourself. Then they drove away, left me standing in the snow that was just starting to fall, outside a warehouse in a city where I knew no one. With $60 in my pocket and a signed confession to crimes I didn't commit hanging over my head like a sword. I was 14 years old, and in that moment, watching their taillights disappear into the gray October afternoon, I understood something that would shape everything that came after. My parents hadn't just abandoned me. They'd executed a strategic operation to eliminate a problem. They'd burned me so thoroughly that I couldn't run back. They'd told everyone I was damaged, criminal, dangerous. They'd made sure that if I ever tried to come home, I would be the one who looked crazy, the one no one would believe. It was brilliant in a sociopathic kind of way, and it taught me the most valuable lesson I would ever learn. Trust is a liability, love is a weapon, and family is just another word for people who have access to destroy. The warehouse door opened. Before I could knock, Richard Mercer stood there. 6'4" gray beard, eyes like a hawk that spotted prey. He looked nothing like my father. Where my dad was soft and polished, Richard was all angles and scars. You Liam? He asked. His voice sounded like gravel in a cement mixer. I nodded. He looked me up and down, then looked past me at the empty street. They even wait to see if I answered the door? I shook my head. He snorted, made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been disgust. Figures. Thomas always was a coward. Get inside before you freeze. The warehouse wasn't what I expected. From the outside it looked abandoned, windows dark, brick stained with decades of weather. But inside it was warm, organized. One half was clearly living space, renovated with exposed brick and industrial fixtures. The other half was an office. Walls covered with blueprints, architectural drawings, property maps. Your father tell you why he never mentioned me? Richard asked, pouring himself coffee and sliding a mug in my direction without asking if I wanted any. No, sir, because I told him 20 years ago that he was a fraud who married a woman even more fake than he was, and that they'd eventually destroy themselves trying to keep up appearances they couldn't afford. He took a long drink. I was right. Doesn't make me popular at Thanksgiving, assuming they still pretend to celebrate. Thanksgiving, he sat down across from me at a metal table that looked like it came from a factory. So what's the story they fed you? What terrible thing did you supposedly do that required banishment to Uncle Richard's house of horrors? I told him everything. The fabricated gambling accounts, the identity theft they'd staged, the confession they'd forced me to sign, the threat of prison if I didn't comply. Richard listened without interrupting. When I finished, he stood up, walked to a file cabinet, and pulled out a folder. He dropped it on the table in front of me. Inside were financial statements, tax documents, court filings. Your father's been bankrupt twice, Richard said. Both times he committed light fraud to hide assets from creditors. Your mother's had 3 failed businesses, each one collapsing because she spent more on appearances than operations. They're not just bad with money, kid. They're parasites. They take from everyone around them and then abandon ship when it sinks. He pointed at the confession I'd signed, which I'd pulled from my bag. This document is worth nothing. You're a minor. It was signed under duress. Any lawyer could shred it in 30 seconds. They threatened you with prison to make you compliant. But they were never going to call the police because that would require them to produce evidence they don't have. The entire thing was psychological warfare against a 14-year-old. Felt something crack open inside my chest, something that had been holding my ribs together. So I can go home? Richard's laugh was bitter. Home to what? Parents who framed you. A brother they're probably already grooming to be the golden child now that you're gone. A social circle that's been told you're a criminal. Kid, you don't have a home anymore. They burned it down. He sat back down, looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity, more like recognition. But you've got something better than home. You've got a clean slate. You've got rage. And if you're smart, you've got me. That's how my real education started. While my brother Marcus was probably enjoying his newly improved life as the only son, the one who hadn't disappointed the family. I was learning skills they don't teach in private schools. Richard Mercer wasn't a failure like my parents had implied in the 3 sentences they'd bothered to say about him. He was a ghost in the system, a man who'd made a fortune buying distressed properties, renovating them, and flipping them before anyone realized the neighborhood was about to boom. He owned 17 buildings in Portland, 23 in Boston, a dozen scattered across secondary markets in New Hampshire and Vermont. He operated through shell companies and blind trusts. He paid his taxes but left no footprints. He was invisible, and he taught me how to disappear too. By 15, I could read a property assessment and spot discrepancies that indicated hidden value. By 16, I was managing renovation crews and learning construction law. By 17, I was analyzing market trends and identifying neighborhoods. 3 years before they gentrified. I didn't go to high school in any traditional sense. I got my GED at 16 and immediately started taking online courses in finance, real estate law, and business management. While kids my age were worried about prom dates and college applications, I was learning how to structure an LLC to minimize tax exposure and maximize asset protection. Richard never let me forget why I was there. Your parents threw you away because they're weak. He told me one night when I was 17, sitting in his office going over a property acquisition in South Boston. They needed a scapegoat for their failures. That's what weak people do. They cannibalize their own children to save themselves. He pointed at the spreadsheet on the screen. But here's what they didn't understand. When you throw away something valuable, someone else picks it up. They threw away your potential. I picked it up, and I'm going to make sure that when you're ready, you're going to be worth more than they could ever imagine. I looked at him. Why are you doing this? Why help me? Richard's expression went somewhere dark. Because Thomas is my brother and I loved him once, before he became whatever the hell he is now. And because if I don't help you, their last act of cruelty wins. They get to destroy a kid and feel nothing. I can't fix them. But I can fix what they broke. It wasn't fatherly love. It wasn't warm, but it was real. And it was more than my actual parents had ever given me. The years passed in a blur of acquisitions, renovations, market analysis. I became a machine. I worked 16-hour days not because Richard forced me to, but because every hour I wasn't. Working was an hour I spent remembering that my parents had looked at me and decided I was disposable. The pain of that doesn't go away. You just learn to use it as fuel. By the time I was 23, I was effectively running half of Richard's operation. He'd started stepping back, letting me make decisions, watching to see if I'd learned the most important lesson. It's not about the money, it's about the leverage. Money is just a tool. Leverage is power, knowing what someone needs and being the only person who can provide it. That's the real currency. Richard taught me to acquire not just properties, but dependencies. We didn't just buy buildings. We bought the contracting companies that renovated them, the property management firms that ran them, the financing companies that funded the purchases. We built an ecosystem where we controlled every variable, where we were never at anyone's mercy. I was 25 when Richard started getting sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they found it. He had maybe a year. He called me into his office on a Tuesday morning in March. Snow was melting outside. That gray slush period where winter refuses to let go, but spring is inevitable. I'm updating my will, he said. No preamble. No emotion. Just facts. Everything comes to you. The properties, the companies, the investments. All of it. I stared at him. Richard, don't, he cut me off. Don't do that thing where you pretend you don't deserve it or you're not ready. You've been ready since you were 17. You're more competent than anyone I've ever worked with. And that includes people twice your age with Harvard MBAs. He pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. But there's something you need to know. Something I've been tracking for the last decade. I opened the folder. Inside were financial documents, loan applications, default notices, foreclosure proceedings. All of them connected to my parents, Thomas and Catherine Mercer. I've been watching them, Richard said. Watching them spiral exactly the way I knew they would. And I've been doing something they don't know about. He pointed to a loan document from 6 years ago. A business expansion loan for my father's consulting firm. $200,000 from a company called North Point Capital. That's you, I said, recognizing the shell company structure. That's one of our entities. That's me, Richard confirmed. They defaulted 18 months later. I bought the debt for pennies, on the dollar from the original lender before it went to collections. They never knew. He showed me another document. A mortgage refinance from 4 years ago. I bought this one too, and this one, and this car loan, and this credit line they used to pay for your brother's wedding. I flipped through page after page. A decade of my parents' financial failures, and Richard had been quietly purchasing every piece of their debt. Why? I asked. Richard's smile was thin, cold. Because I wanted you to have options. When I'm gone, you'll inherit everything, including approximately $2 million in debt that your parents owe to companies you'll own. Debt they have no idea is all connected. Debt that gives you complete financial leverage over the people who threw you away. He leaned back in his chair, looked at me with those hawk eyes. What you do with that leverage is up to you. You can forgive it. You can collect it. You can use it to destroy them. Or you can use it to make them finally see what they threw away. I don't care. It's not my revenge. It's yours. I'm just making sure you have the ammunition. I looked at the documents. At the careful paper trail of my parents' incompetence. At the empire Richard had built and was handing me. At the weapon he'd been forging for over a decade. They think I'm nobody, I said quietly. They think I disappeared. Into addiction or poverty or whatever. Story they tell themselves. I know, Richard said. I made sure they kept thinking that. Every time they called over the years asking for money, I told them you were struggling, that you were in and out of rehab, that you could barely hold a job. I let them believe their narrative. Because the best revenge isn't proving them wrong right away. It's letting them get comfortable in their wrongness, then pulling the rug out when they least expect it. Richard died 4 months later. I was with him at the end. He didn't have any inspiring last words. He just looked at me and said, "Don't be weak. Don't forgive people who aren't sorry, and don't ever let anyone make you small again." Then he was gone. The funeral was small. Richard didn't have many friends, just business associates and a few people from the neighborhood who respected him. My parents didn't come. They didn't even know he died. Until 3 weeks later, when the attorney sent them a notice about the will reading. They'd been named, not as beneficiaries, as creditors. The empire I inherited wasn't just valuable. It was vast. 73 properties across 6 states, 4 property management companies, 2 construction firms, a portfolio of commercial and residential real estate worth approximately $300 million. And buried in that portfolio, hidden in shell companies and blind trusts, was every piece of debt my parents had accumulated over the last decade. I owned their mortgage. I owned their car loans. I owned the credit line they'd used to maintain their lifestyle. I owned the business loans my father had defaulted on. I owned them, and they had no idea. I spent 6 months consolidating everything, restructuring the companies, meeting with attorneys and accountants, learning every detail of the empire I'd inherited. I also spent those 6 months deciding what kind of person I wanted to be. Richard had given me a weapon, but wielding it would define me. Would I be the person who destroyed his parents out of revenge? Or would I be something else, something more calculated? I realized the answer one night. Sitting in the office Richard had left me, looking at the city lights of Portland spread out below. Destruction was easy. Any idiot with a weapon could destroy, but control, leverage, making them finally understand what they'd done without ever having to explain it. That required precision. That required them to walk into it themselves. So I set the trap. I had the attorneys send formal notices. Richard Mercer's estate needed to be settled. All creditors named in the will were required to attend a final reading to discuss debt, settlement, and asset distribution. The notice didn't explain that I was the beneficiary. It just said the estate was substantial, and creditors should attend if they wanted to, discuss their outstanding obligations. I knew they'd come, because my parents could smell money like sharks smell blood. They'd assume Richard had left them something, or that there was something to contest, or at the very least, that they could negotiate their debts down with whoever inherited. They had no idea they were walking into a courtroom where I was the judge, jury, and executioner. The reading was scheduled for December 15th, a Tuesday. I chose the date carefully. It was exactly 17 years to the day since they'd dropped me off in Portland, since they'd driven away and left me standing in the snow. I wanted them to feel winter when they realized what they'd lost. That brings us back to the conference room, to the blizzard outside and the ice inside, to my mother asking me to get coffee because she couldn't imagine that the assistant at the head of the table was her son. Victoria Chen, bless her, let the moment hang in the air. Let my mother's words echo in the silence. Then she said it again. Mrs. Mercer? That's your son, Liam. My mother's face went through 5 distinct stages: confusion, recognition, shock, denial, and finally, a kind of forced joy that looked like someone had told her to smile at gunpoint. Liam? She said, her voice climbing an octave. Oh my God, Liam. We didn't recognize you. You look so different, so grown up. She moved like she was going to hug me. I didn't stand up. Sit down, Catherine, I said, using her first name. Not Mom, the message was clear. She froze, then slowly sank into a chair. My father found his voice. Son, he said, and the word sounded rusty, like he hadn't used it in so long he'd forgotten how it worked. It's good to see you. Richard never told us you were working with him. This is wonderful. Family, all together for this difficult time. Marcus finally looked up from his phone. He was 31 now, soft around the middle, expensive haircut hiding the fact that he was already balding. Wait, that's Liam? He said. The Liam? I thought you were like homeless or something. Or something, I agreed. Victoria cleared her throat. Now that we're all acquainted, let's begin. This is the last will and testament of Richard Alexander Mercer, revised on June 3rd of this year, approximately 3 months before his death. She opened the file. Mr. Mercer's estate consists of real estate holdings, business entities, investment portfolios, and various financial instruments. The total assessed value is approximately $312 million. The number hit the room like a physical force. My mother's eyes went wide. My father leaned forward. Marcus dropped his phone. $300 million? My father said. Richard had $300 million? He lived in a warehouse. He lived simply, I corrected. There's a difference, Victoria continued. The primary beneficiary, receiving the entirety of Mr. Mercer's estate, including all properties, businesses, and assets, is Liam Thomas Mercer. Silence. However, Victoria continued, several parties are named as creditors with outstanding obligations to entities owned by the estate. These parties are required to address these obligations before the estate can be fully settled. She slid 3 folders across the table, one to my father, one to my mother, one to Marcus. What is this? My mother asked. Open it, I said. They opened their folders. I watched their faces as they read, watched the confusion turn to recognition, watched them understand what they were looking at. North Point Capital, my father read slowly. That's the lender. For my business expansion in 2019, I defaulted, but they never came after me. They did, I said. They sold the debt to a company called Meridian Holdings, which is owned by the Mercer family trust, which I now control. My father flipped pages frantically, found the next one. The mortgage refinance, Sterling Financial Group, that's also owned by Meridian Holdings. I confirmed, as is Advantage Auto Lending, which holds the note on both your cars, and Prestige Credit Solutions, which holds the line of credit you used to pay for Marcus's wedding. My mother's hands were shaking. You own our debt. All of it. Not just your debt, I said. I nodded to Victoria. She pulled out another document. I also own the house. My father's face went gray. That's impossible. The house is in our name. Was in your name, I corrected. Until 5 years ago, when you were 3 days from foreclosure. You were 6 months behind on the mortgage. The bank was going to auction it. Do you remember what happened? My father's voice was barely a whisper. Richard said he talked to the bank. He said he handled it. Richard bought the mortgage, I said. Paid off the arrears and purchased the note outright. Then he transferred the property to a trust to prevent you from leveraging it again. The M14 Trust. Liam at 14. The age? I was when you threw me away. The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. You've been living in a house I've owned for 5 years, I continued. The property taxes you thought you were paying. The trust pays them. The insurance? The trust. You've been living rent-free in a property worth approximately $1.8 million, believing it was yours, while the actual owner watched and waited. My mother started crying, not the elegant tears she used at charity events. Real crying, ugly and desperate. We had no idea, she sobbed. Richard never told us. We thought everything was fine. You thought you'd gotten away with it, I said. My voice was calm, flat. You thought you'd successfully erased the problem, sent away the broken kid, kept your reputation, moved on with your lives. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the blizzard. Do you know what the worst part was? I asked. It wasn't the abandonment. It wasn't even the lies. It was the completeness of it. You didn't just get rid of me. You made sure I had nowhere to go. You told everyone I was a criminal. You poisoned every relationship I had. You didn't just close the door. You burned down the house so I couldn't find my way back. Even if I wanted to, I turned to face them. You made me disappear so thoroughly that when Richard died and left me everything, not one person in our old social circle could believe it. Because the story you told about me was too complete. Too convincing. Marcus found his voice. So what, you're going to punish us? Take the house? Ruin us financially? That's your big revenge? I laughed. Actually laughed. Marcus, you still don't get it. I don't need to ruin you. You ruined yourselves. You've been drowning in debt for a decade. Every loan you took out, every credit line you maxed, every business venture that failed, that was all you. All your choices. I sat back down, folded my hands on the table. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to offer you a choice. The same kind of choice you gave me. 17 years ago, Victoria slid new documents across the table. Option 1, I said. I call the debts. All of them. Immediately. You have approximately $2.3 million in outstanding obligations across multiple entities. Given your current financial situation, you can't pay. You'll be forced to liquidate everything. The house goes to auction. Your cars get repossessed. You declare bankruptcy. You lose everything and spend the rest of your lives rebuilding from nothing. My father's hands were shaking as he held the paper. Or option 2, I continued. You sign a settlement agreement. I forgive the debt. All of it. The house transfers back to your name. The car loans disappear. The credit lines vanish. You get a clean slate. My mother's head snapped up. Really? You'd do that? There's a condition, I said. Victoria pulled out one more document, placed it in the center of the table. You sign a confession, I said, admitting that you fabricated the evidence against me when I was 14, admitting that you forced me to sign a false confession under duress, admitting that you abandoned a minor child in another state with no support system. The confession gets filed with the State Bar Association, with the Department of Children and Families, and with the Fraud Division of the FBI. The silence was absolute. You're asking us to confess to child abuse, my father said, and fraud, and identity theft, crimes that have no statute of limitations. We'd go to prison. Maybe, I said. Probably not, given how long ago it happened and the difficulty of prosecution. But it would be on record. Everyone would know. Every friend who believed your story about me. Every business associate who felt sorry for you. Every family member who cut me off because of what you said I'd done. They'd all know the truth. I leaned forward. You built your reputation on my destruction. This option means destroying that reputation to save your finances. You lose your social standing but keep your house. You become the monsters everyone thought I was. My mother was shaking her head. We can't. We'd lose everything. Our friends, our reputation, our place in the community. We'd be pariahs. Or, I said, you choose option 1. You lose the house and the money, but you keep your reputation. You get to be the tragic victims of a cruel son who inherited wealth and turned on his poor parents. You stay sympathetic. But you're bankrupt. I stood up. That's the choice. Money or reputation, financial security or social standing. The same choice you gave me when you decided which was more important, your son or your image. I walked to the door, stopped, looked back at them. You have 72 hours to decide. Sign the confession and I forgive the debt, or refuse and I call the notes. Either way, you finally pay for what you did. The question is what currency you pay in. I left them there, sitting in that conference room with their choices laid out in front of them. Victoria stayed behind to answer questions. I didn't need to be there for that part. I went back to my office, sat in the chair Richard had left me, looked out at the city he'd built an empire in, and I waited. The call came 36 hours later. My father, his voice was hollow. We'll sign the confession, he said. We'll do it. But Liam, please, you have to understand. I hung up. I didn't need to understand. Understanding was what they'd never given me. The signing happened at Victoria's office. They came in looking like people attending their own funeral. They signed the documents without speaking. The confession was detailed, comprehensive, undeniable. When it was done, Victoria notarized it, filed it with the appropriate agencies, made it official and permanent. Then she slid the debt forgiveness agreements across the table. I'd already signed them. The house transferred back to their name. The loans disappeared. The credit lines vanished. They were financially free. and socially destroyed. The news spread through their community like wildfire. The people who'd admired them for dealing with their troubled son now knew the truth. The friends who'd supported them through their supposed hardship now understood they'd been lied to. My parents became exactly what they'd been terrified of. Becoming exposed, ordinary, pitied. 6 months after the signing, I was in Portland for a property inspection when I saw my mother. She was coming out of a grocery store, not the upscale organic market she used to shop at, a regular chain supermarket. She was carrying her own bags. Her hair wasn't professionally styled. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. She saw me, froze. For a moment I thought she might run, but she didn't. She walked over. "Liam," she said. Her voice was different, smaller. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me." "You're right," I said. But I didn't walk away. She set her grocery bags down, looked at me with eyes that had lost their shine. "I know this doesn't matter, and I know it doesn't change anything, but I need to say it. What we did to you was unforgivable. Not just the abandonment, the cruelty of it, the calculation. We sacrificed you to save ourselves, and there's no excuse for that." I waited. She continued. "I've spent the last 6 months in therapy. Actual therapy, not the performance therapy I used to do for social points, and I'm starting to understand what we were. What I was. I was so afraid of being seen as a failure that I turned my own child into one. I destroyed you to avoid being destroyed myself." She picked up her bags. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to ask for it. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what we did, and I'm sorry, even though sorry doesn't begin to cover it." I looked at her. This woman who'd given birth to me and then thrown me away. This woman who'd valued her reputation more than her son. And I felt nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just a kind of distant acknowledgement that she existed and was speaking. "You're right," I said finally. "Sorry doesn't cover it. And no, I don't forgive you. But I don't hate you anymore either. You're just a person who made choices, and those choices have consequences. You're living with them. That's enough." I started to walk away. She called after me. "Are you happy, Liam? Did all of this make you happy?" I stopped. Thought about it. "I'm not happy," I said. "But I'm free. I'm successful. I'm powerful. And I got here by being thrown away by people who thought I was worthless. So in a weird way, you gave me the greatest gift possible. You showed me that the only person I can rely on is myself." And that lesson built an empire. I left her standing there with her grocery bags. I never saw her again. The William Richard Mercer Foundation launched 8 months after Richard's death. It's a nonprofit that provides housing, legal support, and educational funding to young people who've been displaced, abandoned, or falsely accused by their families. We don't just give them shelter. We give them attorneys, accountants, mentors. We give them the tools to build something from nothing. Last year we helped 47 kids. This year we're on track for over 100. Each one of them gets the chance I got, the chance to turn abandonment into advantage, to transform pain into power. I tell them the same thing Richard told me. Your family tried to throw you away. That means you're free. Free from obligation. Free from guilt. Free to build something they can never touch. Some people call it cold. Some call it vindictive. I call it justice. Not the justice of courts and laws. The justice of consequences. My parents chose reputation over truth, image over integrity, comfort over their own child. And they got exactly what they chose. They kept their house but lost their community. They avoided bankruptcy but paid with their reputation. They got to stay comfortable in their physical space while becoming pariahs in their social space. Perfect balance. Perfect consequence. I'm 31 years old now. I run a real estate empire worth over $400 million across 8 states. I employ 300 people. I'm building affordable housing in neighborhoods that desperately need it while making a profit doing it. I'm everything my parents pretended to be but never were: successful, respected, powerful. And I got here by being thrown away. That's the lesson I want you to understand. The people who abandoned you, who underestimated you, who threw you aside because they decided you weren't valuable enough to keep, they gave you the greatest gift possible. They cut the chains. They removed the obligation to make them proud. They freed you to become something they could never control or diminish. You don't need revenge. You need success. You don't need them to apologize. You need them to see what they lost. And you do that by building something so undeniable, so substantial, So powerful that when they finally realize who you became, the only thing they can do is stand there and understand they threw away a diamond because they thought it was a rock. My parents tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed. They tried to erase me. They didn't realize they were creating space for me to grow without their shadow, blocking the light. Every person who's ever been told they're not enough, every kid who's been scapegoated for their parents' failures, every person who's been thrown away because they were convenient to dispose of, you're not broken, you're liberated. The people who should have protected you failed their most basic duty, and in doing so, they freed you from having to care about their approval ever again. So take that freedom, build with it, grow with it, use every ounce of pain as fuel for the engine of your success. And when they finally see what you've become, when they finally understand what they threw away, don't gloat, don't rage, don't even explain. Just exist, powerfully, undeniably, successfully. That's the only revenge that matters. They tried to write you out of the story. You're going to become the author. They tried to make you small. You're going to become immense. They tried to dispose of you. You're going to become indispensable. This is the inheritance trap. The trap isn't the money or the debt or the legal maneuvering. The trap is the one they set for themselves when they decided that you were disposable. They thought they were eliminating a problem. They were creating their consequence. And 17 years later, when they walked into that conference room expecting to collect an inheritance, they discovered they'd already spent it. They spent it on the day they chose their reputation over their son, and the bill finally came due. That's justice. That's power. That's what happens when you turn abandonment into architecture and build an empire from the rubble of what they threw away. I'm Liam Mercer. I was thrown away at 14. At 31, I controlled everything, and I did it by understanding that the people who tried to bury me gave me the deepest foundation possible. The foundation of knowing I owe them nothing. Not forgiveness, not explanation, not even hatred. Just the simple acknowledgement that they made a choice. And choices have consequences. And sometimes those consequences take 17 years to arrive. But they always arrive. Always.